And welcome guys to round number 2 of the European Team Chess Championship. I am not playing today, I am taking a rest, and the guys are currently fighting it out. We are playing against Serbia, and since I'm not playing, I thought I would share some of some things, well, how it is here, how the routine is, and so on. And later on, I'm also going to share some of my views on the games, how they went afterwards. But it's still, the games have started now, so here it's a little bit after 3 p.m. I just went into the playing venue as well to check out the start of the games. Pretty early to say anything, so yeah, we will see how it goes. But of course, I'll be watching the games basically all the time, and I'm going to be cheering for my guys to perform well and hopefully win the match. We are playing against Serbia today. The lineup is that Kirill Alexienko is playing for the first time for us on board number 1 against Sarana, which is funny because they're both originally from Russia, but now representing other countries. Then on board number 2, we have Dominik Horvath with the black pieces against Alexander Injic, who won the European Championship, not the last one, but the one before that in 2024, last year. So that's a pretty tough opposition for Dominik, especially considering that Injic also has the white pieces. But I think that the opening outcome is quite good for Dominik. I think that he surprised Injic quite early on, and he started to think. But yeah, we will see how that one develops. Then we have Valentin Dragonev on board number 3 against Velimir Injic, who is a very strong theoretician, of course also a very strong player, around 2600 always. A bit more than that, 26, 30, 40, something like that. I think that he was working or is still working for many strong players. I think he was working for Mamedyarov in the past, now maybe Giri, at least that's sort of what I heard. So yeah, no one to take lightly. But Valentin has white pieces, so that's at least a small advantage for him. And then finally on the last board, probably the two most experienced players are battling it out, which is Markus Robert against Markus Raga on the final board. Markus Raga, of course, our Austrian player, and Markus Robert, typically always a 2600 player, but he's dropped with his rating quite significantly. Now he's around 2530, but I do think that that's quite too little for him. He's very experienced and a very strong player with a very good understanding, and he has white pieces against Markus. So my prediction for that game is that it's probably going to end in a draw, since this is actually the only board, well, apart from board number 1, where they do have a rating disadvantage as well. And I think that Markus is gonna play it solidly and safe. Of course, our board number 1, Kirill, is the slight rating favorite now against Sarana, since Sarana dropped quite a lot of points. And also Kirill has the white pieces, so we are, at least I'm hoping, well, for everyone to win, but especially there he does have the rating advantage and also the color advantage. But yeah, we will see how that plays out. Apart from that, today I went to some small calisthenics park in the morning with my friend Niels Grandelius, who is also playing here for Sweden on board number 1. And that is nice. Unfortunately, there is no gym in the hotel. But, well, there is, but they're renovating it now and somehow it doesn't work. But there is this pretty cool calisthenics park right in front of the hotel, with actually machines which are outside. That's pretty cool. So I'm planning to go there, hopefully every day in the morning if I can. And yeah, what else did I want to speak to you about? Yeah, the hotel is fine. I think I've already said that in a previous video. The room is spacious and good. That's already quite something, and the Wi-Fi is also pretty decent, which is also important for chess players. The food could be a little bit better in my opinion, but it is also, there's a lot to choose from, and there's always something which anyone can find, no matter if you're vegetarian, vegan, or an omnivore. There's always something which you can get. Yeah, now it is 3:30, something like that. I will try to take a rest, maybe go for a walk, read a book which I've brought, and apart from that, I will see you guys later when I will sort of give a small recap of what happened in today's match, and maybe also from other games which I found to be interesting. So see you guys later. And welcome to today's recap. As we've talked about earlier, we played against Serbia, and unfortunately we lost the match by a close margin of 2.5 to 1.5. Since I did not play today, I wanted to give you a small overview to what happened and walk you through the critical moments. Let me throw my phone on the bed. Walk you through the critical moments of the match. So the first board was Kirill Alexienko against Alexis Serrana. As we discussed earlier, sort of a funny circumstance since both of them represented Russia for a long time and then switched federations to about 2 years ago. So in that game, Serrana is like a pure Najdorf player, so Kirill had something in mind there. He did have a preparation and played pretty quickly knight b3, one of the possible lines here. The idea is that now e5 is less good. The same applies also after the moves bishop c4 and bishop g5. This is where black should not go for e5. Against all other moves, basically e5 is a decent move for black. Why is that so? I've talked about this with many of my students already, mostly in the amateur region, but I still thought it's kind of nice to discuss, because when I think I read this in some book or watched it in some other video, against both moves, bishop g5 and bishop c4, which are way more popular than knight b3, White is already hinting at the fact that they want to control the d5 square, and after e5 now knight b3 or knight f3, I would even say knight f5 I think is the most critical move here. White already has the bishop on g5 and therefore has indirectly a better control over the d5 square, because at some moment he can trade on f6 and then install the knight to the weak d5 square. The same also applies after bishop c4. If black goes for e5 now, I think again knight f5 is possible, or knight f3, and white would get a pretty decent version of some other lines because the bishop is already on this nice diagonal. And therefore, after both moves bishop g5 and bishop c4, black should go for the move e6. The same is also true after knight b3. Now e5 would run into bishop g5, which is also not the end of the world, but I think that at least white can argue that he has achieved something here. So Serrana went for e6. Now a4 is a line which I haven't really seen so much. I've seen some players, some strong players play this before. The idea is of course to stop b5, but the more the main line here continues g4, and then there's some concrete theory there when black pushes b5, g5, and it all gets pretty messy. A4 is aimed at a more positional approach, and I wanted to go to the following position. Here Kirill was still in preparation, and Serrana played the move knight d7, which brought Kirill out of prep, and he went for queen f3, which is a decent move. I also like the engine's suggestion to go for the aggressive move queen g4, with then, for example, if short castle, to go for a more aggressive idea with rook f3, rook h3, and then try to go after the h7 pawn at some moment. But of course, also black has many ways to play this position. It's just a fight with chances for both sides. Kirill went for this, queen f3, knight b4, and now was sort of the critical moment. I guess that Kirill did not feel so happy about his position and went for the move knight a2. And after that, he was sort of in a defensive for the rest of the game, I would argue. The knight on b4 is obviously quite annoying for white. But with knight a2 now, black is sort of happy to trade on d3 and go knight c5 later on, which happened in the game. Has the bishop pair, now the pawn on d3 is weak, and Kirill defended it extremely well and managed to make a draw rather easily, even, I would say. But white is under a lot of pressure. For example, here after rook 81, Serrana played queen c7, which is a very good move, but also the logical move f5 would put white under a lot of pressure. But as I said, Kirill defended extremely well and later on saved half a point. So let's go back to this moment. Instead of knight a2, even if black would trade here after knight takes a2, rook takes a2, I would say that black sort of has an okay position. Probably it's around equal. But knight a2 does seem like not the right approach here. Like white should go for some moves. The computer says f5, which I don't really like because it weakens the e5 square. But some move, like for example rook d1, feels quite normal to me. And then some moves like short castle, king h1, something like that. But I'm also not such a big fan of those positions from the white side. With black, I've played this quite a lot, this type of skivening and setup, because black has pretty nice control over all of the central squares. So therefore, I understand this decision to go knight a2 here, but it did not turn out so well for white. But again, kudos to Kirill for keeping it together so well and for saving the half point against Serrano, who is of course a very strong player. Now let's head on to the next game, which was Dominik Horvath with the black pieces against Alexander Ingic. And Ingic, of course, a very, very strong player who was European champion last year, opened up with c4, and we got a symmetrical English here, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, one of the big positions here where black typically goes for the move e6. Of course, also g6 is possible, transposing to a Marozzi. But Dominik chose the move queen b6, which is rather rare, and it surprised Ingic, who then went for the solid move e3. The main line here is knight b3, and after e6, now white typically goes for the move a3 to prepare going e4 in most cases, since e4 immediately would allow black to go for bishop b4 here. And after a3, black goes d5, and the line typically continues bishop e3, queen c7. I think c takes d5, knight takes d5, something like this, and white typically keeps a very slight edge, but it's not the end of the world, and correspondence games, last time I checked, were pretty successful for black in trying to hold this position. Black is pretty active as well with ideas like some counterplay with bishop e7, bishop f6. Active is probably an overstatement because white is kind of playing for two results in this type of position, but black is definitely very solid. But I guess Ingic, not wanting to run into concrete preparation, went for the move e3. Now Dominik went e6, bishop e2, and now d5, which I do believe to be a small inaccuracy to go for that immediately. By the way, I had this exact position against my student Peter Balint in the Austrian Championship this year, where you can also find the recap on my channel, and here he went for the move bishop b4, Peter, because to pin the knight on c3, which is not the best decision here, however, because after short castle, I think the game continued knight a4, and then I went a3 before, just winning some time against black's bishop on b4. Dominik did choose a better move, which is d5, but instead I do believe bishop e7 to be the best move here. I've also prepared this line from the white side at some point, which I played against Peter then, my student, just to avoid these concrete lines after d5. Bishop e7 is kind of equalizing everything here though, because after short castle, if white goes for the move b3 here, now I don't see anything else how white could develop. Now black can go d5 in a better version. And if now knight takes e6, which something similar happened in the game, now black does not have to take bc, which is almost likely to transpose to the game. And this type of structure I feel like is quite unpleasant for black, at least practically speaking. But instead queen takes e6 is possible here. And if bishop f3, I don't think that this pin was any issue at all for black. I think just queen c7 was fine, and if knight b5, I think I checked queen a5 here, but it was some time ago already. And black was fine. Another nice point is that after c takes d5 here, now there's knight takes d4, and after all of those trades, yeah, the players can basically shake hands. There's just nothing in the position, and it's a dead draw. And it was a nice intermediate move to take on d4 here. So this would have been more precise. Instead, Dominik went for d5, and now we got this position when black has to take bc, because now taking with the queen runs into c takes d5, and white has not played b3 yet, so therefore black cannot take on c3 here, and would just almost lose because black cannot recapture because of bishop b5 ideas. So Dominik had to take bc, and as I said earlier, I do believe this structure to be quite unpleasant from the practical side. I know that the computer is not giving a big advantage at all. At some point, let's go a few moves later here at queen b1, computer is even showing 0.00, but yeah, it is kind of this Grünfeld structure, or semi-tower structure to be precise, but black is kind of lacking some piece coordination. I guess that the queen would often, queen could be better on e7 in some instances, maybe, but then e5 could become weak. It's not really clear what black is playing for here, because the typical breakthrough with d4 is never going to be possible. And white has a few ways to strengthen the position, which Ingic did nicely in the game by bringing the queen to a1. I guess therefore also queen b7 might have been a small inaccuracy, because then e5 is going to be hanging. I don't know what black should do here. Maybe some move like h5 or h6, just slowly try and pretend to do something active on the king side, could be a better approach here for black. Yeah, Injic just slowly improved the position. Those small nice moves, h3. It's always quite a nice way of handling this these situations. And it culminated around here when Dominic played knight b6. Already here it looks quite dangerous for black. Computer says here that rook c5 is the best move, but this is already a move which you don't necessarily like to play. I mean, it all looks a bit clumsy here. Also, you don't really want to give up the bishop pair, even though it might have also been a better decision just to keep d5 protected in a better way. Dominic played knight b6 and now a4 was played, and already a5 is quite an unpleasant threat. Of course, b5, the b4 square is weakened here, but Injic immediately tried to exchange the active bishop on b4, bishop a3, and surprisingly, already black is really in a lot of trouble here because now also the b5 square is weak and d5 is quite difficult to defend in any cases. Also, knight b5 always is a threat, or at least a possibility. So Dominic played queen e7, now bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, and now apparently knight takes d5 is not the best move. Knight b5 would have been stronger, but I think it's, at least from a practical point of view, it's a completely understandable decision just to trade everything off here. And it also, like here, the decision for black to make was incredibly difficult in my opinion. The computer, well, let's start with that. Dominic played rook takes a5, I think very logical going into this position. Still, it does feel like black does have some drawing chances because a4 is gonna fall. But black's problem is that the king is extremely weak, and Injic immediately went after it successfully, as we will see in a second. So what should have black done except for that? The computer wants to take on c1, queen takes c1, and now rook takes a5. Now at first it looks like black is just a pure rook up, but white can regain it in 2 moves, giving a check on c8 and then on c7, and then we reach this position, which I would certainly evaluate, or almost certainly evaluate, as being lost in a game as well. Like, especially if I see it from this position, calculating a couple moves earlier, and here it just looks like a queen endgame where white's king is pretty safe and white is just gonna be able to advance the a pawn to a new queen, and it looks like black is not in time for any counterplay. At least on the low depth, the computer says that with the move h5, black does keep some drawing chances here. Still, from a practical point of view, I don't see anyone, maybe except for someone like Magnus, to hold this in a practical game against a strong player like Injic. Also, even to understand the move h5. As far as I checked, I talked about it with my captain Borki Predojevic a little bit. The idea might be in some cases like this, after queen b5, for example, queen d1 check, king h2, for example, queen d2. Now, if the pawn is on h7, white typically has the idea king g3 to protect the pawn on f2. Here, that's not possible because h4 is going to be there. So that's already the idea of h5, which is not so easy to understand. For example, with the logical moves queen d1, queen e2, white has king g3, and if h5 now, then queen b4, and there is no counterplay here, and white is going to be able to slowly advance the a pawn again, and it should be winning. So I think that this decision is really understandable to go for this. But after queen c1 now was kind of the last chance for Dominic to go for the move king g6, when here it's still not entirely clear how white is really going to win this. Because the pawn on a4 is most likely going to fall, and it's not really clear how it's going to be checkmate, or how white is gonna continue the attack. I think the computer gave some prophylactic move like king h2 here, which is not obvious by any means. Still a hard defensive task for black ahead here, but also for white to show some technique in this position. It's not going to be so easy. In the game, Dominic took on a4 immediately, but now after queen c6, there was no real way to stop the checkmate threats. The game continued king g6, queen e8 check, king g5, now rook c7, so now the 7th rank is weak, king h6, and now g4, with the threat of queen h5 checkmate. g6 was played, queen f8 check, king g5, rook takes h7, and Dominic resigned because queen h6 is inevitable, and therefore white is winning. So in this game, it all, I think, well, not all, but certainly the opening structure did play a role. I do believe this outcome was certainly something which Injic was quite happy to see. I've played many of these structures, especially in Blitz, but also in some classical games, and I always felt that they're quite nice to play for white, because black center is just always under some pressure. So let's head on to the next game, which was Dragunov against Ivic. And Valentin played the Kolle system with e3. And it was a pretty slow game overall. It's actually one, the last two games are the ones where I don't have to add that many things because they were just pretty well played and there was nothing that spectacular going on there. So he played knight e2 here, b6 and now e4, transforming the structure, and now we have this quite typical French structure, but black has a pretty decent version because white has used two tempos to play e3 and then e4. And a couple of moves later, many pieces were exchanged, knight f6 and knight f6, queen e2. Probably if one side can hope for something, it's white because of the slight space advantage since the pawn is already on d4. But black is also extremely solid, and especially the two minor pieces on both sides have been exchanged already. That doesn't really, yeah, after that the space advantage is not really that important anymore because of the two pieces that have been exchanged already. So queen c8, c4, rook e8. Actually, let's skip a few moves ahead here. Both players just played some pretty logical moves. And we came to an endgame, which again is equal, but Valentin was trying to do something, and I thought when I was watching that he has achieved something minimal when he played d5, because in a structure where white takes on e6 and gets the knight to d5, this type of pawn constellation here could become a little bit weak. But still, black is extremely solid, and Ivic didn't allow Valentin basically anything in this game. Let's go a couple of moves further again. Computer was giving a small hope of an advantage here after rook e4. Valentin played c5, instead knight e5 check, but then not to take on c6. For example, if king e6, not to take here, because then black could play bishop c5 and or bishop d6 maybe also here. Probably bishop c5 is safer, and then c4 is going to become quite weak. But instead to go rook d8, trying to activate the rook, then maybe rook c8 or rook a8, or even rook h8, trying to go after the pawns. But also here with normal play, black shouldn't have any difficulties holding this to a draw. Instead, the game continued like this, and a draw was agreed here after rook d5. So pretty well played game from both sides, with a logical conclusion to a draw. Now let's head on to the final game, Markus against Markus, but Markus Robert, of course, Markus being his surname. Markus played c4 against Markus, and Markus played e6, d4, d5, and we have this type of triangle on the board. Here e4 being a very aggressive line for white. I think it's called the Moscow Gambit, d takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop b4 check, and there's a lot of theory here which Markus Robert did not want to go into against the strong theoretician Markus Raga. So instead he took on d5, which is a little bit unusual. Instead white can go for knight f3, which would allow the Notenboom variation after d takes e4, e4 and b5. Or he could also go for e3, which is likely to transpose to some type of Miran variation, or black could also go for a type of a stone wall with f5 here. But he went for the cowspot structure, now queen c2, avoiding any bishop f5, bishop d6, knight f3, h6. Another interesting move, black wants to play knight f6 or knight e7 without allowing bishop g5 to be played. Now e4, d takes e4, queen takes e4. I don't know why this is not working here. Do you guys also see this? Somehow my pieces are fully messed up, but now it should be fine again. This has been happening a bit more recently, but yeah, now it looks good again. So queen takes e4 check, queen e7. Also possible was knight e7 at this moment, but yeah, exchanging queens, especially against the isolated pawn, is understandable decision. Typically, the side with the isolated pawn wants to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. And tried to play for dynamics, so logically Markus wanted to exchange queens here. I think a very reasonable decision. Bishop c4, bishop f5. Now queens were finally exchanged at this point, and if someone is playing for something, it's probably black, because the d4 pawn can become a weakness, but still it's extremely balanced, and white does have pretty active squares for the pieces. Now bishop f4, all of white's pieces are playing in the game, so therefore white does have sufficient compensation for having this sort of a weak pawn on d4. Knight d7, rook e1, rook e8, bishop e3, knight b6, rook e5, attacking the bishop on f5, and also getting ready to double up on the e-file. Now bishop f8, rook takes e8, bishop takes e8. I'm actually wondering why not rook takes e8 at this moment. What am I missing here? Would also be a logical decision, but well, white has a couple of ways to continue. Knight e5 is one option. Then I was calculating bishop e6, but I mean white could also trade on e8, and typically in the isolated pawn, also trading heavy pieces would be good for the side with the isolated pawn, because typically what black is trying to do is put the heavy pieces on the d file to try and pressure the pawn on d4. So maybe that's also why Marcus wanted to keep the pair of rooks on the board. h3, knight fd5, and here the players went for this move repetition. I think that Marcus could have played on, and retrospectively speaking, maybe also should have, but it was already, I mean, it was quite early to say. Dominic did have a solid position, and in Dragnev and Alexienko's game still many things were possible, but yeah, retrospectively speaking, of course, you're always a bit smarter to know how the outcome then was. It also could have been that it was a fantastic decision by Marcus to repeat the moves here. You just never know that, so there's no point in criticizing it, because there's always going to be this situation in team matches. I've also been there many times, and yeah, I think no one in our team is criticizing anyone. We always, all of us are looking out for the team, so there's no there's none of that really bothering us about that. And also, to be fair, I mean, Marcus did not have many hopes of playing for something here, because the position is extremely equalish. If someone can really try to squeeze water from stone here, it's black, but it's going to be a major task. And now I'm also seeing that Marcus did have a little bit less time here. So overall, it's an understandable decision. So that was it for today. Apart from that, yeah, all of the matches were really interesting to watch. I was in the playing venue before as well. There have been quite a few upsets once again. For example, Romania won against England by a pretty convincing score of 3-1. Also, Czech Republic drew their match with 2-2 against Azerbaijan. Also, Poland drew against the Netherlands. So quite a few. I mean, I wouldn't even call it upsets, but some of them have been, yeah, many twists and turns in the matches. I'm also seeing now, is it possible that some people are still playing? It would be already 6.5 hours that they're playing this. 140 moves. Wow. So here we see Can Emre from Turkey against Igor Kovalenko, who... And this game is actually deciding about the tournament outcome, not tournament outcome, but the match outcome, because the match is tied now. There have been 3 draws, and this is the final game, which is still ongoing. So Kovalenko, I guess he tried to squeeze this type of endgame for as many moves as possible. They've already been there for so long. Wow. And now, are they going to finish quickly? What is going on here? King takes e4. So let's think what happens after king takes f2. Does look a little bit scary, no? Maybe check, but then king g3. Hang on. How is black holding this? How is white holding this? Sorry. So king takes e4 was played. Is this the final position? What am I missing? King takes f2. Ah, there's king f4. Ah, that's smart. Completely missed that. So trying to prepare the check here. And if rook e1, then I assume that just going here saves the game, because of rook takes f3 in the next move. So yeah, it looks like this is the only ongoing game in the open section still. So pairings should be out pretty soon. We have the team meeting as well in like 20 minutes or something like that. So until then, I guess that the pairings are gonna be out. Yeah, that was it for today, guys. I hope you still enjoyed the coverage, even though I did not play today. But yeah, most likely I'm gonna be back tomorrow. Of course, it's all up to Borky, our coach, to decide that. But I definitely hope to be back on the board tomorrow. And until then, I guess I will see you guys tomorrow. So take care and see you soon.